It has been a long time since I've uploaded. Not that it's necessarily a big deal because I don't really have an audience anyway. I only have a couple of videos up. But for the few that actually might be interested, I figured I'd give a quick explanation or rundown of why I haven't really worked on anything, why I just kind of dropped the YouTube project so suddenly. A pretty heavily playing factor being COVID-19 and the small ways that it affected my life and the path that I wanted to take, along with me just being indecisive and not really knowing what I wanted to do. Along the way, I also ended up wanting to buy a house, so I started to save for that, but then COVID really kicked in around March, and that affected my overtime, and then I wasn't really able to balance house savings and buying car parts at the same time, so everything was just really slow, nothing was really coming together, I was confused. But now things have calmed down, I've got my priorities in order, and I'm definitely able to see a clear plan and a clear end goal for the car. So I figured now I'm definitely comfortable enough to come back and start making YouTube content again. So with that being said, I don't really think I have to go any deeper into that explanation about it. I think that gets the point across. And I'm gonna jump right into a compilation of like videos and pictures of all the stuff that's happened over the course of the past 9 or 10-ish months since I stopped uploading. And also a little side note, but I've started to dabble in making beats a little bit. I still suck and they're pretty lame, but I figured instead of letting my beats just sit around on my hard drive, I'd at least use them for the YouTube channel and actually use them for background music. So I'm gonna throw my beats in here kind of in the background just to add a little bit of extra spice to the compilation. And obviously I'll chime in with some dialogue whenever I need to. So here we go. I know in one of the previous videos, me and my buddy Mason had moved into this workshop together. He had the Civic hatch and I obviously had my Integra shell. And not much really happened when we were in the workshop. We were mostly just paying for an expensive storage unit, to be honest. Just because things were going so slowly that we didn't really make full use of the workshop space that we were renting out at the time. A couple big things did happen. We pulled the engine in Mason's hatch. That's one of the big things that happened. And I also painted the shell. For the few that may have watched my first video, I showed some close-ups of all the primer spots and imperfections that the shell had. So I gave her a nice paint job. It was my first time painting a car ever. So I did spend some money and got a nice little DIY paint setup with a big air compressor and stuff. And I just went cheap on the paint. With it being my first paint job, I did a little Rust-Oleum paint job, and I just kept it white because I didn't want to have to deal with repainting like the door jambs and the engine bay and all that. And with it being my first ever paint job ever, it turned out okay. Obviously, there's plenty of spots where professional painters or people with painting experience will cringe their eyeballs out of their skulls. Not necessarily saying that there's huge paint runs or anything, because I made sure to wet sand those and all that good stuff. But, you know, down the road, when it comes time to repaint it, if it ever needs it, I'll be more than happy to do it. Obviously, I've learned plenty of valuable lessons just from my first paint job alone. So I will make sure to not make those same mistakes again, and the next paint job will come out better. Shortly after we moved into the shop, I scored a really good deal on a Hydro GSR 5-speed transmission, and it has a longer final drive in it. It has a 4.0 final drive, and then the guy actually gave me a box full of goodies for the tranny, like the original final drive with the matching ring gear for the differential and the old shaft and everything like that. I was also planning on using the engine block from the Silver Parts car, and I'm sure I talked about that in the video, but mistakes were made, and I'm not going to go into detail about it, but I'm not able to use that engine block. So what I opted to do then is there was a local engine block for sale, a B18B1 block, the same kind that I was already going to use. It was only $100 and it had an epoxy sleeve in it, and I have actually talked to Hunter Tuned about this because he's done a couple epoxy sleeve blocks and he says that they've worked well for him, so I figured why not? It's $100. I'll just send it and see what I can do with it. I took all the bottom end parts that I had, such as the epoxy sleeve block, the Manley rods, the Wiseco pistons, ACL bearings, crank girdle, and main studs, and I brought them to a machine shop that was recommended to me by somebody that I had met that has definitely been around the block when it comes to building Hondas and turbo stuff. Not too long after that, I also noticed that there was actually like a bunch of almost this dirt kind of buildup on the lost motion assemblies deep within the head, and some of it was also sitting on the valve springs and stuff, which is funny because when I brought the head and my original engine block to the machine shop earlier this summer, I had them inspect everything before they machined it, so I'm not sure where this dirt buildup came from, but I took it upon myself to just disassemble the head. So rocker arms, valve springs, valves, it all came out. So that way I can just very thoroughly clean out the head and make sure that all that gunk is cleaned out. And I have already cleaned the valves and the valve springs of any of that dirt buildup that was on there, and I bagged and tagged all of it. Once the head was fully disassembled, I also spotted that one of the valve stem seals was actually damaged. It had a crack in it. So with the head already being fully disassembled, I'm just going to replace all of those, give it a nice refresh, and it should be good to go. About a month after that, I had actually made the decision to leave the workshop that me and Mason were sharing. For the entirety of our time renting out that workshop space, the building was just owned by one guy that was retired, and then he ended up selling the building, and I just didn't really like the direction that things were taking with the new owners. So I figured while we were still not under a lease, I would just use this time as the opportunity to leave the workshop. So I paid for the last month of October, the last month that I would be there. Over the course of the month, we just moved out the small things as we needed to. And then near the end of the month, Mason and my dad and I rented a U-Haul trailer, and we took my truck and moved both of the cars out in the same day. So we dropped off the car at Mason's house, and we dropped my car off at my buddy's house. I am very fortunate to have a good close friend that is letting me keep my car there for the time being until I buy a house this coming spring. So any videos that come out between now and when I get a house, this is where the videos about the car are going to take place. Around the time when the stimulus checks came out, I got a welding setup because I have always wanted to fabricate my own turbo kit for this car, including the manifold. So I will be doing that, and that welding setup, as you can see, is also at Nico's house in the garage, along with my car. This workshop situation is just a lot more ideal for me than the other workshop with Mason was because, for one, it's way closer, and it's also heated. It gets warm really fast. So I'm going to be working hard to get the engine at least ready to drop in, if not dropped in by the time I get a house. So with it being heated and insulated, that should make the whole process just very nice. About 3 weeks ago from the date of me recording this, something on the inside of my welder actually exploded. My guess is it was a capacitor on the board that controls the high frequency arc start, because after whatever it was exploded, the welder never shut off or anything. Everything worked except for the high frequency arc start. So that's my guess. I was just working on a cash job for someone locally, and I made it cut with my chop saw, and a couple seconds after that there was a big boom. So I have to ship that out to get warranty repaired. And about a week ago, from the date of recording this video, I finally got my engine back after about 2.5 months of waiting. It turned out awesome. Everything is clearanced and installed. So like the crank, pistons, rods, the main studs, the girdle, it's all installed. And then the rest is up to me. So including the end caps on the block, like the rear main seal, oil pump, everything from there is all me. The original plan was to do the entire assembly myself, but he had a pretty good price for just assembling it there. It would have costed me just as much to buy a bolt stretch gauge, which I would need to properly torque the rod bolts. So I said, you know what, just go ahead and assemble it. That's one less thing, that I have on my chest, and it turned out awesome. As soon as I got the block home, I immediately made sure that the piston cylinder walls were coated in some oil, and I wrapped the whole thing in just plastic saran wrap, just to make sure that while it's sitting and waiting for the rest of the parts for me to throw it together, that the cylinder walls don't start to rust or anything. And that concludes everything. That's pretty much where I'm sitting currently. I am nearly at my savings goal for buying a house, and then after I meet my goal, it's all car parts from there. I'm going to be dumping money into it, and I'm going to try to get this engine ready to go together as soon as possible. I'm very excited to make another video about it, so whenever I make more progress and I have more content to make, I will absolutely do it. And without further ado, I will see you in the next video.